Hey, look, go home and get some rest. Take Tamiflu and all that other good stuff. Wes will take care of you. Thomas is our drummer and good drummer, and he's been sick all morning long. So be praying for him. Yeah, go rest, man. Where was I? Tough sayings of Jesus. So that's what we're going to be looking at. The tough sayings of Jesus. Do you remember your mom or dad, some of the tough sayings they may have said around the house? Oh, yeah. Remember those? Like, here's one I remember my mom used to say. If you keep that frown on your face, it's going to become permanent. And I used to look at her like in dismay, like, what? You're freaking me out. You mean my face can actually like stay in a state where it won't change or anything? You know, as you get older, you realize it's not the case. It's not going to like stay like that. But as I've gotten older and I look at people's faces, when you look just a little closer, you know, people that kind of walk around like this, just always looking like this, you start to see these indentations around their mouth, right? And the wrinkles on their forehead. It's not just age. It's just because their face seems like it's becoming permanent like that. So be careful. Mom's right. Mom's always right. Or mom would say this, if you stick your tongue out, it's going to fall off. So I didn't stick my tongue out as a kid much at all because I didn't want it to fall off. Or here's one that you all remember. If you swallow your gum, it'll take up to 7 years to digest. Right? You remember that one? And I was just thinking, come on, Mom. Really? I mean, like, ooh, really? So I got like this big old ball of gum in my stomach just sitting there. That's why a lot of men have they swallow too much gum, you know what I'm saying? But that's not true either. But that's a tough saying. Or how about this one? Anytime you'd go swimming and you're just tired and you'd get out because you want to eat lunch because you're hungry, and Mom would always say, Derek, you can't go in the pool for another 30 minutes because you just ate lunch, and if you go back in, you're going to drown. It's like, what? Are you kidding me? Like if I jump back in the pool right now, I'll just like sink to the bottom just because I ate lunch. And we realize that's not the case, but sometimes when you do get back in, you start getting the cramps. Ain't good. Ain't good. Or Mom would say, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. That's a tough saying. Because it's tough to just say something nice all the time, ain't it? And this one that you never wanted to hear, and I didn't want to hear it either. You wait until your father gets home. Because you knew exactly what that meant. And isn't it interesting when you look back on your life, or maybe you're there now, you look back on your life, when Mom would say that, it was about 5:30. Anytime she would say that, about 5:30, I just kind of like, oh, Mom, I think I'm going to go to bed and get some rest. I'm just really tired. I don't feel so well. So when Dad gets home, you're in bed, but that never worked. Dad would always, son, I need to talk to you. Tough sayings that Mom had. And Dad had some too, like this one. Son, this is going to hurt me more than it's going to hurt you. It's like, whatever, Dad. Until you have kids. And you may have spanked them. And, you know, it's like, oh, wow. Like Jesse, that doesn't work for Jesse. You can spank Jesse, and he's like, oh, Dad, what are you doing, man? Hit me again. Go ahead. And he just kind of smiles and chuckles. Jesse does. And I don't like that. Yeah, doesn't he, honey? He does. Yeah, spankings don't work on that boy. Or Dad would say, take it like a man, son, which I never knew what that meant. But that was a tough saying. Or he'd say this one, do as I say, not as I do. All right, well, I don't know what that means either, but I'll do that. Whatever you say, I'll do exactly that. Or if you ever said this to your dad, Dad, that's just not fair. And he would say what? Life's not fair. And you realize as you get older, life's not fair. Sometimes it's just not fair. Like you didn't get to choose who your mom and dad were. You didn't get to choose what state you were born in. You didn't get to choose a lot of things. And sometimes life's just not fair. And here's one he would say that I never understood either. He'd say, you made your bed, you lie in it. I didn't make my bed this morning, though. I mean, what? Can you say that one more time so I understand what you're saying? You made your bed, you lie in it. And we know exactly what that means now as we got older, right? Or if you're dating somebody, here's a tough saying. And I think all of us have heard this before. And this one, I don't know of anybody that ever heard this saying and said, you know what, that was the best thing that ever happened to my life. I mean, when they said that, I was just a new person inside, and my heart was healed from all the pain. But when you hear this one, when you're dating, if you love something, you let it go. If it comes back to you, it's yours forever. If it doesn't, then it was never meant to be. Come on, what is that? That's tough. Yeah? I like this one instead. If you love something, you lock it up and you throw away the key so you don't lose it. Right? That's what we've all felt before. Never has brought healing to my heart when I've heard that one. And here's a tough saying of a friend of mine in South Georgia. He used to say this all the time. Whenever he'd get mad at somebody, or like somebody would pull in front of him, or somebody wouldn't go when the light turns green. That happens a lot to me, don't it? Yeah. And I don't say this, but my friend from Georgia used to say this all the time. And it was funny because he'd say it with that Georgia accent. He'd say, Derek, you just can't fix stupid. It's like, what? First time he ever said that, I really was. I was like, what did he just say? I know that was like almost just, that was brilliant what you said. But I'm trying to figure out, you can't fix stupid. And then as I went along in life, it's like, Derek, you're right. You can't fix stupid sometimes, right? Not calling anybody stupid, you know. Tough saying, a friend of mine. And in any sport, any athlete has heard this. And we've all heard this statement before. And it really is true. And it applies to it applies to everything in life that is tough. You know, anything that you're going through that requires a little more of you, that requires you to work harder, and then at the end there's a reward for it. It goes like this: no pain, no gain. Absolutely right. Isn't that true? That's a tough saying though, but it's true. With anything, exercise and trying to get in shape. No pain, no gain. If you ain't feeling pain, it ain't going to change anything, you know? But that's how life is. And what's interesting is those moments in our life that we experienced that would fit under that category, no pain, no gain, if you open yourself up to God and allow God to walk with you through the situation, you'll learn two things. You'll learn more about yourself, and you'll learn more about God too. And so over the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at these tough sayings of Jesus. Because as you read and study the Bible, there are many tough sayings that Jesus made. Sayings that he obviously meant, or he would have never said them. Sayings that were absolutely Jesus, because if it was you or I in that same situation, we wouldn't have said that. We wouldn't have recommended that. But Jesus obviously had a reason to say them, and it was for our greater good, so we would change. So the question is, we're going to ask, what did he say, and then what do we do with it? And when we read it, are we just going to pass it on by, or are we going to kind of like skip over it, or are we just going to smile and say, well, that's kind of cool, but that doesn't apply to me. That's a little too tough. Or do we say this? And are you going to position yourself like this? Jesus, you know what? That's a tough saying. And now I want you to show me what I need to do with that. What relationship maybe do I need to apply that to? Because here's what I want you to understand over these next 4 weeks. Listen to this. What Jesus has to say to us and those tough sayings, it's not about changing God's character. It's not about changing God. It's not about transforming God's character. It's all about changing your character and transforming you and building godly characteristics in your life. Applying what Jesus said to your life, these tough sayings. For example, look at Matthew chapter 5. Matthew chapter 5, we're going to look at that area of Matthew. Actually, it's known as the Sermon on the Mount, or the Beatitudes, the attitudes that you're supposed to have. And it was basically Jesus' first message, if you want to say, that he preached. And this morning we're going to kind of look at revenge and retaliation. What do you do when somebody offends you? What do you do when somebody hurts you? What do you do when someone mistreats you and does you wrong? Like we've seen it in the news a few times. What do you do when you're at a game with your kid and something's said and who knows what's happening, but all of a sudden you see this parent strike this other parent and hits him in the face, knocks him over? What do you do when something like that happens? Last service, we had someone say, "You beat him." Yeah, so I was able to talk to them about all this. It was good. But Matthew 5, it says this. Jesus is talking to his disciples, but because of all that Jesus had to say and who he was, he always had a crowd of people pretty much following him. That's why he'd get away in private at times, because he always had a crowd of people following him. So he was kind of talking to his disciples, but this crowd kind of forms around him, and it's called the Sermon on the Mount. And he says this, Matthew 5, verse 38, tough sayings of Jesus. "You've heard that it is said," Jesus says, "an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth." That simply means this: the punishment is equal to the crime. If you knock someone's tooth out, they take your tooth. If you pluck someone's eye out, they pluck your eye out. Equal punishment to crime. Verse 39, though, he says, "But I tell you this," listen to this now. He's going to add a little bit more to it. "But I tell you, do not resist an evil person." What? Don't resist an evil person. Don't flee from them. Don't run away. He's not talking about a good person. He's not talking about your next door neighbor that you love to spend time with. He's not talking about your best friend or your BFF. He's not talking about that. He says, don't resist an evil person. Someone who's not looking out for your best. Someone who wants to take advantage of you. Harm you, if you will. If someone slaps you on the right cheek, he says, turn to them the other cheek also. What? If someone slaps you on the right cheek, then turn to them the other cheek also. And he's not talking about what happens in the NFL when someone scores a touchdown, and the whole team's slapping each other on the rear. That's not what he's talking about, He's saying simply this: don't attack back. Don't retaliate. But oddly enough, let him hit you one more time. Like turn your other cheek and go, hey, I know that one hurt, but do you got another one for the other side of my face now? Don't retaliate. Don't go after them. And as you study the life of Jesus, you see that's exactly how he responded. Exactly how he responded. We're a week out from Easter, or past Easter. That week of Easter, as you read the life of Christ, he was brutally beaten by the Roman soldiers, punched and slapped in the face, and his beard plucked out of his face. And even just people on the side of the street, as he was walking down the street with the cross on his back, would hit him or smack at him or spit on him. So he's not saying something just so that we'll listen to it and go, oh, okay, I'll try that. He's saying it because he's been through it. He did that exactly. The Bible says he went through all of that and did not retaliate, did not say a word, did not return evil for evil. Don't attack back, he says. That's tough. That's a tough saying of Jesus. And listen, we're not talking about a wimpy Jesus, because anybody can strike back. Anybody can hit somebody else. And that's tough to teach adults, and it's tough to teach kids too. It's tough as a dad. I got 3 boys. It's tough when I read this about Jesus, and I know that as a father, as a Christ follower, and especially as a pastor, that I've got to teach this to them, that there's a different way than what the world's going to tell you. When they come home and say someone was picking on them, we all know that if you take your fist and you hit a bully in the chest and knock him over, that bully ain't coming after you anymore, right? We kind of know that. But that's not what Jesus said to do. He said, turn the other cheek. And in our generation, and in every generation, most men and boys think, the tougher they are, it's because they can take somebody down. I can take him out. I'm tough like that. And Jesus is saying, you know what? It's not how many blows you can give somebody that makes you tough. He's saying, how many blows can you take and not respond? That makes you tough. Don't retaliate. And again, it's not to change God's character. It's to transform us and to change us and make us like Christ. And let me say this. My story, my fist have never felt what it's like to hit someone in the face. Never. And my face has never received a punch from anybody either. 46. Never been in a fight. And I'll tell you why, because when I was 9 years old and I accepted Christ as my Savior and I placed my faith in Him, I started reading my Bible and I stumbled across this too, the way Jesus was telling me I need to act. And so when I would get in those situations at school or in the neighborhood, I wouldn't retaliate. I would walk away from it. 46 years I've done that. 2 years in prison. You don't think I was challenged? I was challenged. I grew up with 10 guys through high school. We played sports in high school and city leagues. I was in the locker room with all the boys. And it's a different world. But Jesus said there's a different way that you can handle all this. Don't retaliate. It's to build character in you. And then he says in verse 40, and if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. And again, I say, what? You mean someone's out to hurt me materially and financially, and you just want me to give them more? Yep, that's exactly right. See, then, your shirt and your cloak was it. What you wore pretty much was what you had. It wasn't like today where we have, come on, let's face it, we have a closet full of clothes. My wife, to her credit, when we were married and years later, she could still wear what she wore in junior high. Right? So she had all these clothes. I mean, she just had all these clothes. And then we started to kind of give them away as we went through the years of marriage. But it's we all have that. We have all these clothes in our closet, so we don't really get this. But he's saying back then, hey, if they ask for your shirt, you give them your cloak too. You were literally giving them the shirt off your back, and you may not get another shirt unless you got one from someone else. But as you grow in Christ, you realize it's not a big deal, because the Bible talks about, where do you store your treasures? Here on earth, or do you store them in heaven? So how much you collect in here compared to how much you're storing there and investing in heaven, in people's lives? That's a tough saying. So if someone wants to sue you, take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. And then he says in verse 41, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Not just 1 mile, go with them 2. And here's where that comes from. Have you ever heard the saying, go the extra mile? Heard that saying before? That's kind of where it comes from right there. See, in Jerusalem, then, Rome was in power. They were the governing authority, if you want to say. And if a Roman soldier came up to a man or a boy carrying anything on their back, all their military goods, if you want to say, whatever they were carrying at the time, and however much it weighed, it was Roman law that if they came up to a man or a boy, they could say, hey boy, carry my stuff. And they could literally give them any weight they wanted to, anything they were carrying, and they would have to, by law, carry for them 1 mile, whatever they wanted them to carry. But Jesus was saying, but listen, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, that's where the law comes from. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, you go 2 miles. But you know as well as I do, if you think about it, back then, that Jewish person, after they went that 1 mile, do you think they took another step? Absolutely not. Because it was tearing and going against their dignity. Them as a man, them as a boy. So they would take it off after that 1 mile and put it down. They were done. But Jesus said, no, don't put it down. Take it 1 more mile. Not to change God, not to transform God, but transform us into this godly character, to be more Christ-like. You know, and I don't really think that we get that, because we live in a free society today, and we don't like to carry a lot of stuff on our backs. Like Eli, man, but that poor boy, he's carrying like a book bag of books on his back every day he goes to school. I mean, it's just loaded down. But we don't like to carry stuff like that. So I started thinking about it. There's nothing that I can compare this to, unless maybe if you went to Walmart this morning and bought your groceries, and as you were checking out, the person who was checking you out said, listen, sir, before you leave, I'm going to need you to carry 100 customers' groceries from here to their car, and then come back and get number 2 and number 3. Before you leave with your groceries, you're going to have to do that this morning for me. It's kind of what it'd be like. And Jesus would say, wait a minute, before you do that and leave, you're going to need to carry 200 people's groceries. It's all about making you think about other people and not yourself. It's all about building this godly character in you. It's all about helping people. That's who Jesus came for. It's about changing who we are and to be more like God, more like Christ. You know, because honestly, we live in a society too that our heart as a society is getting colder and colder. And we wonder sometimes why this is taking place in our nation. I'll tell you why. Because people that call themselves Christ followers aren't really Christ followers. They think of themselves more than they think of anybody else. It absolutely astounds me. Did you see the news about 2 or 3 months ago? The pathetic story, and they've got it on camera. This older gentleman, probably my dad's age, he's 72, pulls up to a gas station to pump gas. He's jumped from behind, he's beaten, and as he's being beaten, the man jumps in his car and takes off. If that's not bad enough, this man who just got beaten, literally, that's all on video, he literally turns and he's crawling like this up to the store, the gas station. As he's crawling up there, they have on video 3 people walk right by him. Don't walk over to help him all. A grown man crawling on the ground and 3 people just walk by. Not only is he in his 70s, he survived World War II. This man that was crawling. You wonder why our society is in the condition that it is in. It's because when you don't know Christ and you live a life void of God, you're supposed to live a life that's void of God. Meaning it's supposed to look like that because you don't know any better. But when you cross the line of faith and you give your life to Christ now, Christ is in you, God is in you, you're now supposed to live a life full of God. And it radically transforms and changes who you are. And things are supposed to be different now. And if more Christ followers, or those who call themselves Christ followers, would actually live like Christ, the world would be different. You know, we see a drunk in the middle of the road, and what do? We avoid him. Why? Because it's inconvenient. Oh, just avoid that. Hey, children, look over here. And we just drive on by. Almost like a pest. Just drive on by. Go the extra mile, Jesus says. Go the extra mile. And then he says, verse 42, he says, give to the one, tough sayings, give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Now, I know this was Jesus, because you and I wouldn't write that. Think for yourself, one moment. Think of that person in your mind. Don't say them out loud, but think about that person that's always wanting you to help them. They're always knocking on your door. They're always calling your cell phone. They're always looking for a handout, if you want to say. They're always coming back to you, and it's just a constant. Never thinking about your well-being. They're not thinking about you. They're not wanting to do something for you. Every time they call and you see on caller ID who it is, you really want to hang up. And you've answered it so many times that I just don't think I'm going to answer it this time. Well, Jesus is saying, that person right there, next time they come asking, what you're to do is you just say, sure, I'll help you. My pleasure. Is there anything else I can do for you? Tough sayings of Jesus. Not to change God, but to change us. To transform us. And let me say this. Let me kind of hit on this just for a moment. You're not going to find any of these tough sayings of Jesus in any self-help books. Not going to find them at all. You're not going to find any of these sayings of Jesus in your get-rich-quick books. How to come your self-esteem issues. You're not going to find them in there. And I hate to say this, but you're not going to find these tough sayings of Jesus in Your Best Life Now. 7 Steps of Living to Fulfill Your Potential. #1 bestseller in New York Times. You're not going to find it in that book. Absolutely not going to find the tough sayings of Jesus And let me tell you why. Because all those books are about you and how you feel and making yourself feel good and the blessings that you can just kind of just pile up on yourself because you deserve these blessings now because you're a child of God. So you just keep getting more and more blessings and bless me, God, and bless me, God. It is, if you haven't heard it before, it is the prosperity gospel. That's where that term comes from, where it's all about you. And it's not gospel. It's not the good news of Jesus. It's actually a false teaching of Jesus. It's a tough saying. Have to think of other people beside yourself. It's what Jesus said to do, though. Think about other people. Because it leads to transforming and changing your life. Philippians 2 verse 3 says, do nothing, listen to this, do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. You can't read into that. But in humility, consider others better than yourself. Each of you should not look only to your own interest, but also to the interest of others. Your attitude should be the same as that of Jesus Christ, who being in the very nature of God did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. Talking about heaping blessings on yourself. Jesus would have never came to earth if that's the case. But made himself nothing, taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness and being found in appearance as a man. He humbled himself and became obedient to death, even death on the cross. But listen, today we have a great taste, less demanding Jesus that's taught in most churches and across our social media. A Jesus that doesn't demand a lot out of you. He doesn't want to inconvenience you. And that's a false teaching Jesus. That is not the Jesus of the Scriptures. I started reading this book. It's about what was life like in year one in Palestine, around Jerusalem, Rome, those areas. What was life like then? What was the home like? What was currency like? What was the community like? And it goes on and it talks about what was death like. And I started reading it. And it talks about the Roman Empire and the Roman soldier. And we just came a week out of Easter. And we're talking about Jesus and these tough sayings. And I want you to get a clear picture of who this Jesus is. So I'm reading through this book, and he talks about just how tough the Roman soldiers really were. And they were unlike anything that we've ever seen. We wouldn't recognize them today. They were so tough that they really, if you want to say, they would really get off on brutality. In fact, it's one of the reasons why most historians say you find so many various forms of a cross, because they really enjoyed being brutal to people. And so you have crosses that are like an X, you have crosses that are like a T, you have in some cases, crosses that were just a straight board where they would nail them like this. They really enjoyed beating people and that brutality. That's why in the story of Christ, as you read it, that's why the Roman soldiers were below him and they were gambling basically on his robe that they had. You know, they weren't troubled by what they saw like we would be. And as I was reading it, he brings up the point that in the 1960s, they found one around Rome. They found one, and this is the only one that's ever been found. They found one crucifixion, if you want to say, that was still intact. Meaning they literally had the bones and the bottom of the cross intact still. The bones, the nail, and the wood intact. It wasn't the crucifixion of Christ, but it was an individual that was crucified. And what they found was that, and there's a lot of theories about how Christ was crucified and the way they crucified them then. But what it suggested, because it showed it, was that probably the way that they crucified people the most, because it would create the most agony and pain, was this way. Instead of like we see Christ being crucified standing on this little form, and then with his hands this way, it suggests that actually his hands would have been wrapped around the beam and been crucified on the back side. So the beam would come through his shoulder blades, on the back side of his shoulder blades. Now, the reason that probably is more true than the other is because in doing so, when you wrap the hands around the backside like this, that individual literally is holding up their weight. They're not going to rip down. See, they've always theorized, well, how can you put a nail in somebody's hand without just ripping through? Because after a while, it's just going to rip through. So if they crucify them like this, their elbows and their arms and their shoulders are literally hanging them up there and holding them in place. And what they found on this one crucifixion was that the legs weren't standing on a platform like this. They were actually split open and nailed through the heels into the side of the beams. And for a Roman soldier, that would be the way he would choose. Because of this. Because what they wanted to do is to show the community just how powerful they really were and put the fear of them in them. So they didn't want, in a crucifixion, the criminal to die quickly. They wanted a slow death. They wanted a slow death all the way up to the point where their goal was that they would not die quickly, but that they would be eaten alive as they were crucified by vultures and dogs. Dogs were popular then, not pets in your home. Dogs then, their purpose was to actually eat up all the dead bodies because there were so many. And so you have a Christ being crucified with his hands possibly on the backside, on the sides. And that's why when we have the story of Christ, it was odd that Jesus died so soon. Because usually it's a slow, agonizing death. And now you can see how slow it really is. To the point where you might not die before the vulture comes and starts pecking and eating at you. So why do I say all that? I say all that to say that's the Jesus that I'm talking about. That's the Jesus that I'm talking about in the Bible. That's not the prosperity gospel Jesus that came and died like that so that we can build up a fortune here on earth and wear a suit and tie and be just all rich with material wealth. That Jesus doesn't exist in this Bible. Excuse me, the wealthy one that I'm talking about. It's not about health, wealth, and prosperity. It's about these tough sayings of Jesus that are going to create in you a godly character, or you could just skip over them and move on. Never have to deal with it. We today have a Jesus that's a great taste, but he's less demanding. Doesn't demand much out of you. In fact, if it inconveniences us too much, you just can not do it, and still be a Christ follower. So Jesus was a tough teacher. Jesus was a tough teacher. He had some uncomfortable, tough sayings, and he was not a teacher of convenience, but of hardship. Not a teacher of comfort only, but also of suffering. And let me say this, following Jesus is not easy. Because it's a constant battle. Listen, it's a constant battle between doing what you want to do and submitting yourself to God and what he has called you to do, because it'll radically change your life and transform who you are. So, when's the last time you turned the other cheek? When's the last time you bit your tongue and didn't have the last word? When's the last time you were mistreated and you didn't retaliate? Evil for evil. That's tough to do. But that's the Jesus way. When's the last time someone asked if they could borrow something from you, and instead of giving it to them and lending it to them, you just went to Home Depot and bought them something new and said, "Here, I want you to have this." When's the last time you stopped what you were doing to help someone else in need? Instead of $1, you gave them $10 or $20. Or when's the last time you saw your neighbor was needing help and you just rushed over to help them? That's the Jesus way. That's Jesus in you. When's the last time you looked beyond yourself and looked at humanity around you and your heart broke for them and your thoughts were on them and not yourself? Loving God, loving people, serving your world. The tough sayings of Jesus. So when you come to these tough sayings of Jesus, what do you do with them? How do you handle them? Will you skip right over them, or do you apply them to your life to be transformed and changed to be more like Christ, who's selfless? And as usual, some of my sermons, my messages, when I prepare them, God tests me. And sure enough, I was 10 minutes Fridays from finishing up, and I usually come back Saturday and just tweak my message. 10 minutes before I was to leave, guy walks through, knocks on my door, and needs help. Now, my flesh is saying, oh, man, I got to get home with my kids, and it's Friday. And my spirit is saying, this Jesus that you serve, Derek, would help this man. And so I start wrestling back and forth, and I say, sure, what do you need? How can I help you? I need some gas, okay? Okay, we don't have any cash in the church, and I don't have any cash on me, so let me drive up to Walmart, you follow me, and I'll get you some gas. So about 10 minutes go by, and I finish up what I'm doing, and sure enough, he follows me up there, and I pull up in the gas station, he pulls up behind me, and I'm thinking to myself, now, Derek, $10 is really good. 20, whew, you've gone over the top if you give this man $20 for gas. And as I'm pumping, God said, well, why wouldn't you fill it up? You can't fill up this man's gas tank? Of course I can, God. Absolutely I can. As it goes to $65. But it builds godly character in me, and I know that. And it's not about my treasures here on earth. Now, the question you're probably asking maybe is, well, Derek, did you use the church credit card? Or did you use your debit card, huh? And I ain't telling you. You'll be pleased to know that I used my personal debit card. You know, because it's about me giving too, you know? I mean, this man came to me and asked me, so I did. Because I get it. Not always, but I get it. That it's not about me. So this week, look, so what do you do with all this? This week, this is what you need to do. Look for opportunities to apply this. Look for opportunities, and then take the challenge. When you see the opportunity, I could have easily, you know what my response that I can stop at is, we don't carry cash in the church. We don't hold cash in the church. And I don't know the safe combination. So I'm done. Just come back later. But I know that not to be true. I know that I can help him out. So look for opportunities, and when they come your way, take the challenge and let God transform you and create his godly character in you. And I leave you with this. Ephesians 5:1-2 says, be imitators of God. Therefore, as dearly loved children, and live a life of love, just as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us as a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Be imitators of God. Let's pray. God, thank you so much for your word. Thank you for your life that you gave for us. Thank you for giving your life completely for us. And Father, I pray that you would give us those opportunities this week and challenge us and change us and make us more like your Son. Make us more like him and not ourselves, God. And I pray for everybody in this room that, Father, you would give them opportunities, that you'd stretch our faith in you. And Father, is anyone here that doesn't, the word says if they believe in their heart that you raised your Son from the dead and confess with their mouth that you'll give them a new life, and Christ, your Son, will come and live in them. So Father, this week let it be a week that reflects you as we imitate you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Hey, I love you all. Stand together before you leave and say with me one time, love God, love people, and serve your world. All right, be imitators of God. Love y'all. Bye-bye.